Hey, what's up guys? My name is Nicholas Corcel, and today we're going to be reviewing a book that you've probably never heard of, Content by M.T. White. M.T. White is a contemporary American writer that really came onto my radar a couple years ago on Twitter just because we followed some mutual writers and we had both written for the same magazine. And I really enjoyed his commentary on Twitter. He wrote a lot about modern art, film, these types of topics. And he released a book that he promoted a little bit on Twitter, and I always had thought that I would get around to reading it, but by the time I was ready to buy the book, just because I had a big backlog of things that I was reading at the time, but by the time I was ready to buy the book, he had taken it off of Amazon. And that's kind of a common factor through a lot of this guy's work is it's pretty difficult to find. Sometimes it's widely available on the internet, sometimes it's not. But through a few mutual connections, I was able to get a Kindle link to Content. It's now available on Amazon, so of course I've linked it in the description. But if you're on the fence about buying it, I would definitely recommend buying it sooner rather than later because who knows when it'll get taken down again, if ever. But regardless, he was kind enough to send me a free copy of the Kindle edition of the book. And while I'm traveling, it's been really great because, I didn't have time to ship a physical copy to me because I change locations every couple weeks. And I absolutely loved it. It was one of the most refreshing novels I've read in the last couple of years. And it's really reinvigorated the flame and the passion I had for self-published materials. And it's really confirmed the idea that self-publishing and going the independent route is the way forward for writers in this heavily censored time that we find ourselves in. So to briefly introduce the work, Content is a work of postmodern fiction, which admittedly is not something that I read a lot of. I've never really clicked with a lot of postmodern work, but for some reason, and maybe it's just because of the cultural relevancy of Content, I really enjoyed this one. But yeah, it has a lot of the classic postmodern storytelling techniques, things like fragmented narratives, switching tenses, atypical formatting, things that really push the boundaries of what fiction and the novel, both as a form and as a narrative, can really be, right? This book looks and feels much different than anything you've ever read. Before making this video, I watched an interview with M.T. White on the Renaissance of Men podcast, and he described Content as a meta-analysis of postmodernism told through a series of postmodern storytelling techniques. And while that's a bit of a convoluted, maybe even confusing description, I can't think of a more accurate way to put it. Additionally, a little bit later in that interview, he pointed out that whenever memories get particularly intense in the book, the tense shifts into the present. And that made me go back into the book and re-engage with the text at different points. And as I started to notice that, I really realized that this is definitely a book that you're going to want to revisit a couple times. You go through it once and you're going to get a great story and some great commentary on the modern world that we live in. But there's so much that you can really just dig into. There's so much meat in this book that you can keep coming to again and again, especially if you're a writer or an artist of any degree. And you can really just appreciate some of those more craft elements that people maybe who aren't writers won't really care about as much. And so for me, I really am looking forward to, in a few weeks, going back into the text and looking at the book on more of a sentence by sentence level and examining some of the craft choices he does. Because M.T. White is a writer that really not only pays attention to the words that he's writing, but the exact execution and the way that they're presented on the page. Everything in Content and all of his other works are intentional. It's very clear that he views the structure of the story equally, if not more important than the plot itself. And while in typical postmodern fashion, the plot of this book isn't overly important, especially in comparison to the themes and the big ideas that he's grappling with, it still is engaging and highly enjoyable. And so we're just going to quickly run through a basic plot overview. I don't really believe that spoilers are a thing, especially in books like this. You don't read it for the plot, and if you know what happens, it doesn't change it, right? It's all about the execution by the author and those little minute details that they give you throughout the novel. In the simplest terms, this book is about a young American man named Jason, who's an English teacher in Japan, who is just navigating young expat life in Asia, and he falls in love a couple different times. He ends up embroiled in a murder plot, which then shifts into some major conspiracy, which then maybe shifts into a global conspiracy. And throughout all of this, he keeps flirting and dipping in and out of this online hate groups, right? He's in all these little Reddit and 4chan chat rooms and whatnot where he's saying these incredibly hateful ideas, right? There is some passages in this book that are beyond anything that you'll ever encounter in your normal life, and it really is getting under the skin of like what internet radicalization looks like in the modern age in a way that is so incredibly honest and doesn't beat around the bush. You know, like we see a lot, we'll like watch TV and they'll say, oh, this guy committed a terrible atrocity and he was being radicalized by whatever. And they'll say like a different, whatever the popular like chat room is. Maybe it's a Slack or a Discord or whatever it is at the time. And that really is about as far as we'll go. Of course, you can go online and sometimes you can find more information. But this book, it dives super deep into like what specifically he's saying, even on the level of like how he's formatting the things that he's saying in these chat rooms. And so you're getting like this first-hand view on what this radicalization process looks like, as well as like a dichotomy between his two selves almost, right? Like online, he's this like super racist, anti-Semitic, like stereotypical like alpha male, right? And then in real life, he's kind of sensitive. He's watching these art house films. He's getting uncomfortable talking to different people. And he has this really strong, overwhelming desire to fit in with the people around him. And he's feeling these emotions that are very real and deeply human. And you find yourself like really empathizing with him. It's like when he's in his real everyday life, you as just a normal person totally empathize with him, and you're like, oh yeah, I see myself in this. And as a person who's traveled abroad a lot myself, there's definitely moments in the book when he's like presenting as just Jason, the normal guy, where I'm like, oh yeah, I felt those things. Like, yeah, it does feel lonely if you walk around Asia by yourself, when all the signs are in a language you can't read. All the people are looking at you like, you know, you're some like zoo animal or whatever. And you feel those things. And then he goes home, or he'll pull out his phone and he'll get into like a Slack channel and he'll start talking about like how the Holocaust isn't real, or just insane things like that, right? And it's so interesting to see how humans, especially in the modern era, can jump in and out of these two lives. And I think that like to a degree, and M.T. White himself kind of touches on this in that podcast, which again I'll link below, how we all do this to a degree. Like we all have the version of ourselves that we project online and in real life. Like for example, even me right now, me making this video, I write and I talk about literature, books, writing, travel, things like this. I make these videos every week. In my real lived experience, I hardly ever talk about it. I don't have a lot of deep relationships about literature in my real life. But that is still my real self. Like when I'm interacting with my friends at home or whatever, I'm still presenting an authentic version of myself, but I'm not discussing the topics that I will discuss on this channel, and vice versa, right? There's things about my personal life that I'll never put on YouTube. And this split, like I think a lot of people want to view one as true and one as false, or one as authentic and one as inauthentic. But the reality is they're both authentic and inauthentic in different ways. And that's another just really strong point about this book, right? Jason isn't just a racist, but he's also not a racist, right? He's both. At times he can be racist, and at times he's just a sensitive guy who has an overwhelming desire and need to protect those around him. And we see in the book's climax when he feels this big desire to step in and save his friend, right? His online self would have made fun of him for doing that. Yet, when the going got tough, he did it. But does that negate everything he said online? Does that change it? I don't know. And that's really the question that this novel grapples with throughout. And it's something that it makes you think. And as you go through the days after you finish it, it's one of those books that you continue just kind of ruminating on for days and days and days. And that's a great sign of strength, especially for like a postmodern book that is designed, to incite thinking. And so as I've touched a little bit throughout this video already, this book has 4 really major themes that it plays with throughout. The first and biggest overarching theme is this idea of like censorship and government control. And we see that a lot through the Pure Light cult that he gets involved in. They're controlling one narrative. The Japanese government, they're controlling another narrative. We have the U.S. government. We have some of his liberal friends. We have the alt-right people that he's talking to in these chat rooms. Each one of these different people, right, they have their own narrative and they have their own means of control. He follows a couple of these online celebrities and they've amassed a massive following, and that following promotes their worldview. The liberal friends that he has, they promote their worldview. The government controls their worldview through different means, of course, but each one of these groups has their own enforcement means, which for the government might be the army, when for an internet celebrity it might be just a million fans that will just like comment like crazy and just harass you until you kind of submit to their ways. I think the easiest way to think of this non-governmental control is in the little analogy that M.T. White used in that podcast. And he talks about how, like, there's certain views that we all have that we wouldn't say to, like, our barista in the local coffee shop because those views have been, like, societally decided to be wrong. Even if they're objectively pretty mild, you know? There's just certain things that you can't say, even though we all believe them. There's certain criticisms or cultural critiques that we're not allowed to publicly make. Yet if you sit in a coffee shop, you can very confidently say, oh, probably 80, 90, even maybe everybody in here agrees with me. But if I say it, they will all perform in such a way that they have to act like they don't. Another big theme that we touch on is this idea of online dissidence and how everybody is just so brazen online. Everybody online is just this alpha male who is just, everything they do is right. They know the answer to everything. They're so confident. They'll tell you exactly how to have a successful relationship, how to make money, how to do this, how to do that. And then in real life, it's just some loser or just some random guy or just some guy who's just furiously typing at his daughter's soccer game, right? These aren't really real people, but they're so aggressive and they're so confident online. And that really leads into, as I've talked about before, this idea of mini selves, which is another major component of the novel, and how we all have like 15, 20, 30 different versions of ourselves that we present depending on the different contexts that we find ourselves in. And finally, this is probably one of the smaller themes of the novel, but one that definitely hit me pretty hard, is this idea of expat loneliness. We all really romanticize the idea of moving abroad. I think pretty much everybody who has moved abroad, you romanticize it. That's why you do it, right? You lay at home and you're sitting in your bed and you're like, oh, my life will be so much better if I make it to X, wherever that place may be. For Jason in the book, and I think for the author himself, because he lived in Japan, that place was Japan. You probably romanticize this place as, oh, it's going to solve my problems. And then you get there and maybe your life gets better, because my life certainly got better once I moved abroad, but it doesn't fix your problems, and it just kind of changes them. You get new problems. And this idea of expat loneliness is a very, very real problem, especially when like the language barrier is super huge. Like I'm in Europe right now, I'm in Paris, and I can speak a little French and I can read it much better than I can speak it, and I don't feel that overwhelming sense of loneliness. But in Asia, it's absolutely huge. You feel helpless. It's like being a baby again. Like you can't read anything. Everybody looks at you weird. It's an overwhelming experience at times, and this book just captures that perfectly. There's one particular section that happens pretty early in the book that really boils down all of the themes at play, as well as the significance of this book in the two relatively short paragraphs. And I'll read it to you right now real quick. But for those of you reading this in the privacy of your home or office laptop or tablet or phone, after the documents are leaked by some disgruntled government affirmative action hire, I ask why seeing words and ideas that are taboo, things you're not supposed to say or think, I ask why do they make you uncomfortable? Is it because these words, mere words, go against long-held and cherished personal beliefs that you are raised with and strongly believe in? Or, could it be, maybe, they make you uncomfortable because after they thought of others knowing you're reading it, this, wrong think, with at least a faint curiosity and wonder, maybe even tremble at what others think if they knew you were reading this, and may look down on you or take some form of action against you. You may be the target of discrimination, heaven forbid. And you don't want to upset your life with a veneer of stability, do you? You may talk of slaying sacred crows, but really, you're just throwing rocks at an unsanctified carcass rotted to the bone. The power principle is the pleasure principle, after all. But you know that, don't you? And this idea, right, that many of us are operating from a point of fear when we are vocalizing the things that we don't like is something I think we all can relate to. How many of us say, oh, you can't say that, oh, you can't do that, when in reality we don't care? You know, like, I don't know, I think we all do that all the time. And that right there, that is the essence of content and why it's so important. In my opinion, the most important aspect of this book is its cultural relevancy today. It feels like the first truly online book, if that makes sense. When you read this book, you get transported into a deeply online world, and it's like the first book that feels like it was written by a digital native. And I know that the writer himself he's not like in his early 20s, he's not Gen Z or anything like that, but he captured that feeling in an absolute just incredible accuracy. When you're reading it, and like, I've never thought that I'd be able to read a book that like describes a Slack chat room in a way that feels like you're in a Slack chat room. It's completely insane. And that's just, I think that's the biggest praise I could give this book, is that it's like the defining book of this new digital age that we're entering right now. Because, you know, we're entering this new world that we haven't explored yet. You know, back a couple hundred years ago when they were exploring the Americas, there was people, they were just kind of rolling the dice and figuring it out as they went. That is very similar to the time that we're living in today. This is really the first generation that has fully grown up online, and the first generation where people's realest and most authentic relationship is happening on a phone. You know, like, your best friend might be just some guy from Albania that you talk to in a Slack chat all the time. You might not even know what he looks like. And that's something that humanity has never faced before. You know, in the past, you had like your friends that you'd go and you'd meet at a bar or a pub, and you'd talk about the shared interests. Maybe you'd go bet on horses together, or maybe you'd go watch a basketball game or a football game or whatever. You had these shared interests, you had this community. Now the community is all digital. It's all a bunch of pixels on your screen. And that can be a beautiful thing at times. It can make people connected, you know. It can make us feel not lonely when otherwise we would be. You know, people with more fringe interests. You can be a guy who really likes obscure, like, Russian art and live in Idaho. And you can have friends who are also Russophiles all over the world. And you can have great connections, and you can talk about, you know, all kinds of different things that you're all interested in, and that can be beautiful. It can also go the other way, though, where you can be so lonely that maybe you're preyed upon, or maybe you're not even preyed upon. Maybe you enter into these things willingly, and you find yourself being radicalized, and you fall victim to a lot of these bad actors that you see both on the far right and the far left, where they're preying on people who feel discontent, maybe. I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's the best way of describing it, but these people that feel like their life is lacking something, where they're like modern age snake oil salesmen, where they're telling you that, you know, they'll give you 3 things that are very real problems, and then their solution will be kind of just some bullshit that is related to something that they're trying to sell you. We see that a lot through like the 2 major like political figures that are talked about in the book, these online influencer type guys. They tap into something that's real and that we all feel, right? So like they'll be like, do you feel this? And even a normal person is like, yeah, I feel that. Okay, well, do you feel this as well? Yeah, I haven't thought about that, but yes, I do. And they keep going. And then that final gap is where things just descend into complete madness. And that's the reality of these radicalization groups. It's not like, people don't lead with like, hey, join a terrorist group. Nobody is leading with that. That's not the first thing that they're saying. They're saying a lot of things that are true and a lot of things that make sense. And then once you trust them, and once you've bought in, then you make that last little jump. And that's when you find yourself believing and typing things that you don't believe in, because, you know, this is my group, this is my community, and your identity becomes that of a communal identity. And in this book, we see like 12 different examples of that, you know, from his liberal friends to the pure light cult, which ends up killing the girl that he's sleeping with, to the government and everybody else. They all have like this group think in their own way. And it's so interesting to read. And it's really just a comprehensive deconstruction of modern digital society. In the simplest of terms, throughout the entirety of content, M.T. White is doing something that no author that I've ever encountered currently is even attempting to do. And for that reason, I think that's why this book wasn't traditionally published. He mentioned in his interview on the Ren of Men podcast that he was at first a little bit upset that it wasn't picked up by a major publisher and that there wasn't excerpts in the New Yorker, because in his opinion, the quality was there. And while that might be a very bold thing to say about your own work, after reading it, I mean, I agree. He self-edited this book. He self-published it, did everything himself, and it certainly will be on my top 5 list at the end of this year. And it's transformative. It's a book that, you know, you read and you want to just go up to the person and say, you know, I'm glad that you wrote this. This was an important book. And the simple fact that it wouldn't be traditionally published today is why the whole traditional publishing system is fundamentally broken, and why I think any writer, young or old, who is trying to do something significant, who's trying to do more than just sell some copies and like take a selfie next to their book in the Barnes and Noble, should really be considering the independent route. Because if independent is giving me books like this, and traditional publishing is just giving me another rehashing of the same story, the same point of view, the same good demographics versus bad demographics, and this is the correct way to think, this is the wrong way to think, case closed, that's it. I know which side I want to be on. I guarantee that this book is unlike anything you've read in the last 5-10 years, and for that reason, I could not recommend picking it up more. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Nicholas Corcel, and I'll see you in the next one.